Beginner motorcycles. This is literally the perfect time to get started on a motorcycle. There are so many options, from beginner cruisers to ADV bikes and now even high revving inline fours. I'm gonna guess that you already have some sort of idea what you're looking for. In fact, you're probably holding that image in your mind right now as you watch this. I'm gonna guess that that motorcycle looks something like a Harley Davidson or a Ninja. I know it might not actually be a Ninja, but I bet it looks like one, doesn't it? But there's one style of motorcycle I don't think that you've considered, and I think it's the best place for you to start. And in fact, today I'm going to nominate the greatest beginner motorcycle of all time. Let's dive in. Now, I'm not just gonna stand here today and tell you what bike I think you should start on. I'm gonna go ahead and rate all of the different categories of motorcycling, and because I know the internet loves a list, we're gonna start from my least recommended to the most. Now, a point of order before we get started here. I'm not one of those people who says that you have to start on a 300. I would recommend starting on a smaller motorcycle, but you could go all the way up to something like 75 horsepower and be just fine. Anything after that, you get a little bit hairy, but beyond that, just get what makes you happy. This list right here is more of just a guide, something I've cobbled together after years of riding a bunch of different kinds of motorcycles. But if I don't recommend the one that you want to start on, go ahead and start on whatever makes you feel good. Now, before we dive in and crown the king beginner bike of all time, let's start out with the styles of motorcycling I don't really recommend. Okay, so it's not fair to say that this is the worst style of motorcycle to start on, but I wouldn't really recommend it unless you're 100% about this life. It's the super sport. I know, what a surprise, a giant guy who barely fits on a lot of super sports doesn't recommend them, but I have my reasons. The biggest reason is kind of an oxymoron, and that's because they're so damn good. They are hyper-focused on carving lines, hitting apexes, and making you feel like a GP superhero. And I know that sounds awesome, because it is. But if you're a beginner, you want something that's gonna allow you to really grow with it, and not something that demands that you ride it the way that it wants to be ridden.
Always being in an attack position can be rough, and not to mention that these motorcycles, they tend to have very heavy steering when you get down to low speeds, which can result in a couple of parking lot drops on your shiny new paint. It's also worth pointing out there aren't really a ton of options in this space. You've got motorcycles like the RC390, the Yamaha R7, and the new ZX4RR from Kawasaki, but that's about it. None of those are motorcycles that I would really recommend for street duty. These aren't bad motorcycles, they're just really at home around a racetrack.
The next one in my don't recommend list might come as a bit of a surprise. It's cruisers. There are so many cruiser people out there right now who are about to blow a gasket, but stick with me on this one. Cruisers, a lot like super sports, are designed to do one thing really, really well. It's to roll down the road, be comfortable, and look good doing it. They don't make a ton of power, they can be had super cheap in the secondhand market, and because they have low seat heights, they can be very appealing to people with lower inseams.
If all you're looking to do is see what's going on in the next town over, then a cruiser might be right for you. But if you want to get sporty, or maybe you want to go off-road, or you want to take it to a racetrack, a cruiser is going to get all out of sorts really fast. And I mean, duh, Spite, that's not what they're designed for. And that's kind of my point. You're gonna hear this a couple of times throughout this video, but you want a motorcycle that's going to broaden your horizons. Something that's going to push you out of your two-wheeled comfort zone. And that's sort of the antithesis of the two-wheeled lazy boy mentality.
Regardless of which bike you decide to get, you need to pick up a pair of flying eyes to go with it. Their sunglasses come with nearly unbreakable frames in all kinds of shapes and styles. Kinda like motorcycles. They're also designed specifically to fit between your head and the padding inside your helmet so that you won't have any pinching or pressure. Click that link down below and use the code SPITE for 10% off your order.
Now let's move on to a tentative recommendation, the sport touring bike. These are bikes that generally look like sport bikes, but with much more relaxed ergonomics. Sometimes they have full fairings, sometimes they don't. I'm talking about bikes like your V-Strom 650s, your CB500Xs, all the way up to bikes like the Tracer 900 and the supercharged H2 SX SE.
Now, I'm going to go ahead and lump in all of those comfy sport bikes, stuff like the Ninja 400, the R3, and all the 650cc laid-back sport bikes out there that look like they can hang with their super sports, but are really designed for you to be able to ride them all day long. Sure, they don't have a ton of storage options built in, but they're very much designed for you to be able to sport tour on them. If you're one of those folks who's convinced that they're going to be doing nothing but street riding, these can be super duper appealing. However, I do think that there are better options out there. Also, let's be real. It's kind of fun to be able to leave the pavement every now and again.
It's just a fact that riding off-road is where the best riders are born. Everybody from plebes like me to the greats like Rossi on Marquez, they all practice riding off-road to hone their skills. Now, I have taken bikes like the Hyperstrada here off-road, and it kinda works. But if you take anything that's more street biased, something like a Ninja 650 off-road, it is going to be an exercise in pain.
Okay then, says the smart viewer, I think I see where this is going. I'm gonna go ahead and grab myself a dual sport. That's gonna be the best of both options, right? Ride it on the road, ride it off-road, have some fun. Feels about right, right? I'd say you've almost got it.
The benefit of starting on a dual sport is you can literally take one anywhere. Whether it's down a twisty road or up a mountainside, this bike can get you where you want to go. And they're pretty cheap, with bikes like the CRF 300L costing only $5,300 and the KLX 300 costing $5,800. Also, since most of these bikes are singles, you're not going to have to worry about big repair bills, which is nice when you're just getting started.
The downside with these bikes is they all tend to kind of look and sound the same. You can cover it in the coolest livery or whatever stickers you want and buy the best exhaust in the world, and no matter what, a dual sport is always going to look like just a dirt bike.
Another drawback to the dual sport is that they suffer on the highway. Don't get me wrong, they can buzz along at 75 miles an hour all day and be totally fine. But between the vibrations through the handlebars from the motorcycle, as well as a generally uncomfortable seat, it can be pretty punishing to ride a dual sport on the highway for long stretches. Generally, I would consider a dual sport a motorcycle that you want to add to your stable, a second motorcycle to pair with your street bike, not as something that you want as your solo, your one and only.
Moving on up to our last three, all of these are going to get a hard recommendation from me. Regardless of which one you end up deciding to go on, you're picking a great bike that is going to give you a ton of fun down the way. But I still think that there's a clear winner, and let's go ahead and give third place to the adventure bike.
Everything I said about dual sports sucking on the highway, yeah, you can just go ahead and toss that in the bin when it comes to adventure bikes. They're the perfect blend between on-road performance and off-road chops. Sure, an ADV bike won't be able to hang on single track nearly as well, and you might work a little bit harder than your buddy on a 450, but for the beginner, an adventure bike is a great way to dip their toe into the off-road world and still have a motorcycle that can hang on the street. I'm a huge fan of the adventure bike. I mean, obviously I own a KLR 650, however, I don't know that I would recommend that one as your starter per se. It's a great bike, don't get me wrong, but it is a little bit of a donkey, and there are some better options out there. Something like the Tenere 700 or the Motomarini X-Cape or even the TRK 502X from Benelli are great options that have a little bit more punch than the KLR 650. The one issue with ADV bikes generally is they do tend to command a slightly higher price tag than other motorcycles. The Tenere 700 starts at about $10,000 bucks, and then you've got your X-Cape for about $8,000. There are some cheaper options like the KTM 390 Adventure, which has all kinds of technology in it for $7,400, but honestly, at that point, I would forego some of the technology and get a slightly bigger motorcycle in the 650 category for not a whole lot much more cash.
Now you could call this the second place, the silver medal winner, the runner-up, but honestly, it's a gold medal winner in my book. It's the naked bike. And yeah, I am lumping in bikes like the Bonneville in here, which are generally considered standards. But regardless, all naked bikes take the best parts about sport bikes while getting rid of all of that annoying plastic between you and all the serviceable parts, as well as all that irritating back pain. Naked bikes are probably the most ubiquitous style of motorcycle in the world. I don't have any data on that, mind you, it's just an observation, but just about everything I see on the road nowadays is some form of naked bike. Why? Because they just hit.
Think about it. You've got a bike that's got a sporty engine, it's tuned for street duty, it's got upright ergonomics, and in most cases, they look pretty cool. What's not to love? In the hands of the average rider, they handle awesome. And not to mention, because there aren't a ton of plastics, it's really easy to service them. You can get to stuff like your coolant, your oil, and even some of your electrical connectors without having to take all of the plastic stuff off of your motorcycle. And as a happy byproduct of having less plastic, they tend to run just a little bit cooler than your average sport bike, which can be handy in the summer months.
They're endlessly practical, available new and used for not a ton of cash, and these are a kind of motorcycle that you can grow with for a long time. There's a ton of options for mods in the aftermarket. If you want to sell it down the road, you are gonna find a buyer 100%. And naked bikes run the gambit from chilled out retro style bikes all the way up to coked out super naked motorcycles that are making like 200 horsepower. That is why naked bikes are a gold medalist in my opinion. But what could possibly top that?
In a world where every motorcycle looks the same, where they all have parallel twin engines, where safety dads reign supreme, only one kind of motorcycle has the balls to prove it has a room temperature IQ.
Supermotos! They are the best kind of motorcycle out there, period. They only ask one question every time you turn the key on, and that is, are you ready to have some fun? They're light, they're nimble, they can run on the highway, and if you want, you can slap some knobbies on them and take them off-road. They can corner just as hard as any sport bike out there, and if you want, you can pop some little wheelies, or you can if you practice enough.
Speaking of practicing, 90% of the supermotos on the market have plastics that can be replaced with parts from Amazon, and they look just like factory new. Not to mention, you have all kinds of crash guards out there that are available specifically for your bike and can be installed in minutes. Regardless of whether you have a boo-boo practicing in a parking lot, you know, maybe you're doing some slow speed drills, or let's be real, learning how to wheelie, or if you have a spill off-road or on a racetrack, you can get a supermoto back on the street with nothing but the coins rattling around between your couch cushions. It is worth pointing out that supermotos aren't the fastest thing out there, and they do tend to suffer on the highway a lot like dual sports. However, because they have slightly heavier 17-inch rims, they do handle a lot more like a naked bike than they do a dual sport.
If you're a tall rider and you're looking for something comfy and sporty to learn how to ride on, look no further than the Supermoto. But for you short kings out there, don't worry, Supermoto's got your back too. Bikes like the KLX 300 SM have a very approachable seat height, and despite not having a ton of power, they're still an absolute riot to ride. However, by far, the number one, the king of the Supermoto class, is the DRZ 400 SM. And by the transitive property of goodness, that is also my pick for the greatest beginner bike of all time.
I have had my issues with a cantankerous DRZ 400 in the past, but you can find great examples from almost the last 20 years for around about $4,500. DRZs hold their value super well, especially if you take care of them. And not to mention, they have a fully adjustable suspension, which can be a huge boon for you taller riders out there. But don't let their tall seat heights intimidate you if you're on the shorter side. Because the DRZ is only 317 pounds, you're going to be able to hold it up at a stoplight with just 1 foot after a little bit of practice. I can safely say that if I was going to start my motorcycling journey over again and I wanted to get out on a nice, cheap, fun motorcycle, I would be looking for a used DRZ 400, no questions asked.
And there you have it, my list for the best styles of motorcycle for you to get started on. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below, and while you're down there, don't forget to check out Flying Eyes. Use that code SPITE for 10% off your order, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.